Welcome to Within You, a podcast that explores the unknown, the liminal space as we all navigate between where the heck are we? Where are we going? Or, what's next? Yo soy Vivian Carrasco. I'm a wisdom teacher, mindset mentor, and transformational guide based in Fort Worth, Texas. And it is my pleasure to be with you today. And I am with the amazing Ren.
Hello.
And the super cool thing is that, Ren, I'm looking at you in real life.
I know, it's so weird.
It is totally weird.
Especially in this day and age.
This is COVID-19 20.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and you are my second in-person interview.
Which is bizarre, considering you started in 2014.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But because I'm just now growing up into real life people. You know?
You were using artificial people before?
No. Okay, guys, you're in for a treat. Like, you're in for such a treat. I'm not even going to go follow that story.
Please don't.
Okay. So, Ren, I invited you on the podcast because we had coffee last week and we got into some really amazing conversations. And at one point I was like, you and what you're going through is exactly what I hope to shine a light on. And I wanted to just have a conversation with you, record it, share it like with the broader public so that I wouldn't be the only one that enjoyed it. And just go into, Maggie.
I would shove her off, but I'm afraid she'll just like bite my hand off.
She might. She really might. So if there's jingle bells in the background, it is Maggie, my grandcat. So it's tougher doing in real life interviews. Do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's visual distraction everywhere. When they're online, it's like I can close my eyes and just totally sink into the conversation. So it's interesting. I'll actually re-listen to this interview and then my conversation with David and compare it and see how it's just interesting. Anyway, I do that. I go off on tangents. I just go with the flow. So you and I were having coffee last week. And at one point you said something about accepting that there were so many unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, how did you do that? And before I go into that specific conversation, feel free to give the listeners a sort of intro into what's going on in your life, just to give that some context.
Yeah. I think that a lot of us have gone through change this year in ways that we can't imagine. I mean, a lot of us are working from home, or we lost jobs, or we've lost loved ones due to the virus or things that have happened that are unforeseen. And the only constant that I think we've realized is change. And I'm a part of that too. In my personal life, this year probably would have been one of the worst without COVID if we didn't factor that in. My younger sister is transgender, and she also has a slew of mental illnesses. She was diagnosed with autism when she was younger, and that kind of snowballed into depression and anxiety, all of which are manageable and are totally normal and healthy. But in the past 8 to 9 months, she developed schizophrenia, PTSD, and eating disorder, and eventually went on to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which was formerly known as sociopathy. This led to a lot of treatment plans that didn't necessarily help her, nor did she want the help. And it got to a point where things were volatile in our house, and we were afraid for our lives. She talked to us about how she had never loved my mom and I, and that was a red flag. This was before any of her diagnosis. And she began to show signs of violence and just not being completely there, despite still getting the help that she needed and that we were providing for her. And so at a certain point in September, she decided to leave because she didn't want to continue to take her medicine or to feel restricted by the things that we were asking her to do for her own well-being and for ours. And so she left on foot with everything that she owned and chose to go live with some friends, and we haven't seen her since. And that change was probably one of the hardest because simultaneously, you have been afraid for your life for the past couple months, and afraid that this person that you thought you knew and loved and cared for and helped to cultivate and grow might actually end up doing something harmful against you or taking your own life. You're fearful of that. But then once they step out of the picture, you're fearful for them in the world and in society and society's reaction. So you have to weigh the fear of you have to weigh the fear of them being homeless or being on their own with also the constant fear every day of potentially losing your life. And so that fear of that situation actually manifested into a fear of change, because these were situations that I couldn't control. And so I began to read it as, I can only control how I react and what I do to be there for her and to show up for myself, but I can't control the situation. I can't control the chemical reactions that are going on in her brain. I can't control the generations of biology that are manifesting in her right now. I can't control what's going on. I can only control me. Mm-hmm. And so the change that I chose to take a hold of was the change in my own life and manifesting good things and trying to focus on ensuring that she has a safe space if she wants to return. And if not, that door is always open. So,
yeah. Well, one of the beautiful things that I think came from that, and tell me if I'm wrong, is your Toughersations card line for LGBTQ and folks.
Yeah, so that stemmed from my sister, but it also stemmed from being a part of the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of letters. It's like alphabet soup.
I know, I went really slow, so I wouldn't
Yeah, LGBTQIA plus or two-spirit, depending upon...
I love the two-spirit term, by the way.
I do too. It's finally time that was made public and not just kept hidden away for people to not realize it's part of their culture and community. But it stemmed from being a part of this community and not having a safe way for people to come out. Mm-hmm. So having a tough conversation or a toughersation is just about being able to be who you are and inviting people along with that journey. So it's basically a card series of invitations for people to say, hey, I'm a lesbian, or I'm gay, or I'm queer, and I want you to be a part of my life. And then sending that off. It eradicates the social anxiety behind it all and the fear of rejection and the fear of change moving forward, but also poses an invitation to the recipient of, this person loves you and wants to be in your life and wants you to know their full identity. Will you accept? And how can you say no to someone who's coming to you with all that they are, Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link to those cards in the show notes so that if you're interested in buying them or taking a look at them, you have a chance to do that. But you're a true artist to turn that pain into something beautiful to share with everyone else. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course.
And you also have another big unknown coming, which is related to a physical geographic move, which I'm kind of sad about.
It's okay. It just means you can take a trip.
Yeah.
A really, really long trip. It's like a 14-hour flight.
Yeah. I'll wait for you to visit your mom.
Who said I'm coming back?
You have to come back.
I mean, I don't have to.
Let's save that for up there.
For those of you who are lost, I got a job offer in Shanghai. And so depending upon when you hear this, I'll either be there or I will be about to go. So I'm leaving in December to go teach English and to do marketing out there, which is exciting. I've only left the country to go to Germany and parts of Europe, and I've never been to Asia. And it's a huge culture change for sure. I think it's the furthest you can get away from American culture is to go to Asia. So I'm very excited.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
But how are you dealing with the unknowns of that?
I'm consuming a lot of YouTube videos of people who are already there, and they're like, this is what not to do in order to maintain your sanity.
Don't you just love that YouTube gives you the answers to everything now?
I do, but there's not a lot of videos on China specifically. And I think it has to do with their firewall ban. Because they have that, it's called the Great Firewall. And so social media platforms that are here aren't necessarily accessible or available to the public in China. So Facebook is blocked, Instagram is blocked, and you have to have a VPN to get anything out unless you're like a major corporation. And so there's not much YouTube out there on China.
Wow. So that's something you might bring back to us.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, I also want to loop everyone into how we met because it was super cool, I think.
Yeah, so my cousin Jeremy out in Seattle is a part of this wonderful organization called Creative Mornings, which unites creative people together to have community and to encourage each other and to just showcase what's going on in your neighborhood, because it can be really easy to get discouraged when you don't see the tangible efforts of a collective group of people. So he was in this group and I said, is there anything like this that I can get involved with? And the closest place was Dallas, which was... It's too far.
It's so far.
It's way too far.
We love you, Dallas, but you're so far.
Yeah, and parking's horrible.
Dallas.
Like Dallas parking is bad.
Yeah.
But he said, you need to contact Vivian and you need to contact her now. And he sent it in all caps. And I was like, okay, who is this Vivian person? Mm-hmm. He's like, she's starting up a Fort Worth chapter of Creative Mornings. I think you guys would get along. Message her now. And so I did. That day I messaged her and I said, hey, I don't know what's going on, but can I get involved? And Vivian was like, sure, let's meet for lunch. And so we met at a local grocery store / cafe. I thought it was just going to be us meeting. And then the whole team showed up and Vivian was like, do you want to stay? And I was like, I have social anxiety. I was not anticipating. No, it's fine. I was like, I was not anticipating this. I'm going to leave.
But you left us with like amazing food.
I did. Yeah.
Because you're a baker extraordinaire.
Sometimes.
Always.
No one sees my mistakes. That's great. Like, I only bring people the good stuff. No one sees the bad stuff.
You've been amazing.
So, and like I brought food today. You just got to bring food.
You did. And I have almost not stopped eating it. If I didn't have to talk, I'd still be chewing.
It's okay.
So, and actually Creative Mornings in Fort Worth is turning a year this October.
Which is insane.
Isn't it crazy?
It does not feel like a year.
It doesn't.
No.
Oh my gosh.
Especially with COVID happening and not having like everything for Creative Mornings is usually in person once a month. And so you're filled in a room with like 50 other people who are just as energetic about the city as you are and about people. And so not having that energy has been a true lack during this time that's been felt. And so it doesn't feel like a year, but it also feels like a year due to everything. Yeah.
And 10 years. Yeah. We are actually, so if you're listening to this and you haven't heard of Creative Mornings, you haven't joined us at one of our local events, then Google us, YouTube us. We are in 219 cities across the world. And Fort Worth is lucky to have a team of people behind the production of these monthly events. And we are so excited about, cross our fingers, hopefully coming back to in real life hugs and high fives in 2021. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Ren. So when you're thinking about, because one of the things that I really highlight on the podcast is the transformations that we move through and how we should hold lightly our identities because they're fluid throughout our lives. Mm-hmm. Tell me your perspective on that.
I think there are parts of yourself that are permanent and that you have to hold true to. Otherwise, you would just change all the time and you wouldn't have a foundation. But I think otherwise you have to be open to change. Otherwise, it'll overtake you and then you'll equally be as lost as if you didn't have an identity. So it's a careful balance of finding out which facets of yourself you want to maintain as you age and which ones you're okay with letting go. And it's going to change. There will be some that you'll let go of that you come back to later that you see need to develop and grow because they're useful for this moment in time of your life. And there are others that just need to be by the wayside for the rest of your life. So it's hard to navigate because it's almost like when a snake sheds skin, it's shedding to be able to go on and to develop into a bigger being. And so it's going to keep shedding skin, but that doesn't mean that the snake is any different. It's just getting rid of old layers.
And the way that I'm interpreting what you just said is that we're staying true to our core values, inner truth, while recognizing what is a mask or a layer mm-hmm. and deciding what we're putting on and taking off. Mm-hmm. Is that how you see it? Mm-hmm. What are some identities that you've shifted over the years?
So I was born into this world an 80-year-old woman.
I love that about you. So much.
It's so true. Like I was drinking hot tea from the young age and crocheting, and I didn't enjoy things that other people my age did. And I think that comes from a long history of like childhood trauma. There's a whole bunch of psychological issues that go with that. But it is the thing that I most celebrate about myself too, is this ability to age quickly, but also maintain the fun parts of life. But some of the things that have been core values are definitely empathy, kindness, compassion, respect, and believing that people are intrinsically valuable. I know that the last one is a little bit controversial because if someone is disrespectful or, doesn't have emotion or can't do certain things, are they intrinsically valuable or not? Because they're not contributing to society, they're not contributing to their own life, they're not really adding anything. But I think that people are valuable no matter what.
Well, I agree with you. I think I think there's a huge tension, especially in American culture, between doing and being. And we generically, right, have this push towards productivity and doing and producing and having outcomes when it is just as powerful to just like experience like the moment without any activity, without any agenda. So inherent value in every human, I'm behind that.
Yeah,
Totally.
well, that, and you know, to speak on the busyness culture side of things, I think we've gotten to a point where we feel like we have to monetize everything. Like you can't just have a hobby, you can't have something that you enjoy. And I think that speaks to this devaluing of human nature and human productivity, that it can't just stand on its own, that it has to have a price tag or something attached to it, some transitional, transactional value. And I think that has seeped into our culture and into our mindset, because it's like, I can't crochet and I can't read without thinking about the cost benefit analysis of the time that I'm spending on those things, rather than just enjoying those things. That's not okay, because those things are intrinsically valuable to me and they make up who I am as a person. But the busyness culture that we live in says that that's not valuable, that I'm not valuable unless I'm doing other things that add to society, which isn't okay.
That's not okay. You're right. So how do we get away from that? Have you found yourself moving towards maybe just enjoying your passions just because they're your passions, or are you still feeling this struggle to sort of monetize and make it make sense?
I definitely think about things like so I enjoy baking, obviously, and a lot of people have told me that I need to make it into a brick and mortar, and for a long time I thought that that was what I wanted to do, and then I realized that I don't want to do it, and that it's people telling me that I need to monetize my passion. And I got to a point where I couldn't bake in my free time, because I was just thinking about the cost benefit analysis of like, oh, I could be doing this or networking at this event, or, you know, adding skills to my repertoire in order to propel me further. You know, it's gotten to a point where it's better. Those voices are a lot more silent, but they're still present. They still take up mental real estate. And so I'm trying to find a way to evict them, but it's not working so great.
I totally hear that. I think that's actually another way that I think about how we can transform in response to outside change, is by recognizing how that change on the outside transforms us into our deeper values, and whether or not we actually think something is important, or are we just believing what people are telling us. Like, I would never want you to have a brick and mortar because I know what goes with the brick and mortar. Like, I'm going crazy just thinking about it. And if that's keeping you from baking cakes, right, and from, you know, sharing happiness, then how can that be good right now? So for me, I guess I want to speak a little bit to my experience, and then I'll ask you. That's been the hardest and most beautiful parts of the last several decades of my life, is distinguishing between whether or not that voice was coming from my own heart and my own values, or whether it was something that someone on the outside at some point told me that I needed to want or have, and it wasn't really for me. How did you determine, like, you said you're trying to evict the voices. How are you distinguishing between whether the voice is yours or culture?
I am very analytical, to give some background. Like, if someone gives me a piece of information, I will look it up. I will go read scientific journals and articles and see what the facts say. But you can't really do that with your brain, right? You can't do that with the internal voices. And so I basically have an internal dialogue with myself, and I'm like, okay, did this come from my grandparents? What were their values and beliefs? Did this come from my parents? What were their values and beliefs? And then I also think about where they were as people. Were they whole when they told me this, or when they taught this belief, or were they just as broken as I feel now sometimes? Because that can distinguish a lot of the messaging that you interpret as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult from your parents and grandparents and friends around you, is seeing the brokenness in other people and seeing how it affects you and how it echoes on your own, and then distinguishing from there. There's not really a clear-cut answer. It's just a lot of evaluation and being mindful and trying to discern what happiness is and what joy is and what fulfillment is and how they're all different, and not becoming complacent.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where it gets dangerous, is when you become complacent and comfortable and you don't push past the margins in order to find out what voice lies within you.
That is beautiful. If you're listening, you should pause and you should rewind the last 30 seconds to listen to Ren say it again. And I'm sitting in it a little bit. I agree that whoever, like, whether it was the person who said you should have a brick and mortar business, or relative giving you a certain kind of advice, if they're speaking from their own pain, in their intention, they're probably thinking that they're helping you, But in reality, it's not in complete alignment with who you are. And so it's not helping. And then it's hard because we're social beings to pull ourselves away from that context and move towards what we want. So you said you're trying to evict the voices. I think that the voices will always be with us. I once heard Elizabeth Gilbert talking about fear. And she said that often when she was taking a path, an unknown path or a new direction, that she would imagine being on a car ride with fear, and it was on the passenger side. So it was going to travel with her, but she was quick to set boundaries to say to fear, like, you're not going to have control of the radio station. Mm-hmm. Have you heard that before?
I've not, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That these are like once we're in the body, because we're in a body, whether it's a brown body, whatever kind of body it is, whatever we associate with our own body, it has, I think, features that come with it, like a flight or flight response, like confirmation bias, like the way that our brains work and the way that we respond to stress, and not even like danger, like fear as a present and immediate danger, like we're about to fall off of a cliff, but what you said earlier, where it's like, it's really a hit at your identity, like how people see you or how you want to be seen. And that's the thing that we haven't figured out how to navigate in this century, I think, because in the past it was all real danger. We had a short life to live, and now we have an expanded life, thank God, right? It's almost 80 years on average, but we aren't really recognizing that we're not fighting a lion. And so we have this constant anxiety and stress and duress that we're having to cope with.
And at the end of the day, to go back to the topic of pain and fear, I don't want to be something that mirrors someone else's pain and reflects that out into the world, nor do I want to be something that absorbs it. But what I want to be is someone that cultivates and grows their own foundation and withstanding. I don't ever want to be something that just reflects and refracts someone else's pain, because I don't know who that's going to hit. When the sunlight comes through your window and it hits the mirror in the morning or whatever time in whatever day you're at, it reflects anywhere. It just depends upon the position of the sun in that time and that moment in that day, but it can hit anything. And it's the same with emotion and with pain. And I don't want to be conduit for someone else's pain to affect another person in a negative light, because it travels.
It certainly does. I actually see your reflection more like the rainbow that we saw earlier. As we were, to bring you into the story, we were upstairs, and there's a mirror in my yoga studio, and the light was hitting one of the mirrors a certain way that there was a rainbow coming across the floor. And I see your personality doing that in the world. I have, between the Toughersations card line, your company, Fahrenheit, the cakes you've personally made for our family and our celebrations, the way that you would bring your love of food and variety and quality and all these amazing things that I don't have a talent for to Creative Mornings. So amazing. So I just think you're a beautiful human. I'm so going to miss you when you leave, but I plan for you to come back.
I'm glad that you ended it with humor, because I was about to say, you too, thank you for everything that you do, because that's what I do. I deflect compliments because I don't know how to take them. But thank you.
You're welcome.
And I deeply appreciate it. And then in turn, what Vivian has created, and I'm going to compliment Sandwich, it's fine. Yes.
I'm shaking my head. No, don't do that.
I mean, she's an incredible leader, and she has brought a community of people together that I never would have met otherwise. I mean, Jeremy got us in touch, but if Vivian hadn't coordinated and gotten everything together behind the scenes and created the avenue for a lot of people to connect, I wouldn't have half of the friends that I have today. And so I think that ability to orchestrate and facilitate community is huge. There's so many different parts of it, but the biggest part is being able to take initiative and see the need and then try to fill that gap and meet people where they're at. And it's not an easy task, and you do it well and with grace and with patience and with anger, but mostly with patience. But the anger is important because it turns into passion.
It is a motivation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
But we still got stuff to talk about. One of the things, because the conversation that we had over coffee was just beautiful. And I think one of the things that I am so excited about in this phase of my life is that I have friends like you where we sit down and it's not surface conversations. I mean, we're talking about really deep and important stuff. And so one half of it was, how did you get to make this big leap, right? How did you learn to handle all of this change and really mold it into what you wanted. And then on the other hand, one of the things that we talked about, and I might have it a little bit wrong, so feel free to correct me. But like you said, you were born an 80-year-old woman, because I keep forgetting you are literally the age of like my youngest son. But it doesn't matter. I don't think...
You can say it. I'm 24.
I didn't want to say it.
I just broke the fourth wall. It's okay.
You did. But do you remember when I actually realized it? Like, I was like, my mind was blown.
Vivian freaked out.
I totally freaked out. I didn't even believe it. But because you have such a wise soul, you know, like a gentle, wise soul aura around you. I don't even know what to call it, but I love it. I love that you're my friend and that we have these kinds of conversations. So you guys are, I mean, I think this is a gift for you to listen to Ren and know about Ren. So, okay, what I was getting to is we talked about all this unknown, and then there was this idea, and I think because of our age difference, I wanted to get your take on it. You know, 100 years ago, our average life was about 40. And the milestones around a 40-year-old are really simple, right? You have about 12 years of education, 20 years of work, a few years of leisure, and then basically die. But now with the extension of our life, our milestones aren't as compact. And I think people are kind of not lost, but sort of disorientated in where they are and what's happening next for them. How do you sense that in the world?
I think people are stumbling around blindly, and I don't think they're realizing that they're stumbling. They're kind of just grasping for straws because that's what they see people in front of them doing. But you're right. I think adolescence has been expanded, and we see it so often with people my age. So, I mean, in the olden times, and I have air quotes for those of you who can't see this, in the olden times, if you were my age, you would be married by now. You'd probably have 1 or 2 children, and you'd either be working or you'd be supporting a family in whatever capacity that looked like. But now, because our adolescence is extended, thank God, I wouldn't be able to have a higher education or do any of the things that I'm doing now without it. It's left us wondering what those milestones are, and we really have to set those goals for ourselves because we're realizing that it looks different for everyone. This idea of the stereotypical American dream, if you're in America, has basically crumbled to the wayside because it no longer has importance or significance, and it's not as readily available or attainable for a lot of people. I mean, that's just the reality of it. A lot of people can't afford homes in the same way they have student loans. They can't afford to go to college, which even further extends this existential crisis, because if you can't reach those milestones that used to seem set in stone, where do you go from there? And for me, I deal with this almost weekly, so it's not like I've mastered this at all. But I evaluate my life on the people I've interacted with, how genuine I've been with them, and what I'm working toward in the future. It really has nothing to do with me. It's just my part in it all. And so I see it as, have I been empathetic? Have I been kind? Have I been understanding? Have I been able to meet people where they're at? Have I been able to enact positive change in the world? And have I been able to grow for and with people? And those are the milestones I really set myself on. So going to China, for instance, it's forcing me to grow and change, but my perspective might also shift some people in China's perspective as well. I know I've made friends in China already who haven't thought about things the same way that I have, and it's caused conversation because initially we clash, but after that clash sparks a huge conversation.
I love your premise of conversations and engagement. I mean, there is so much research and there's a body of work out there that says that your happiness level increases with, the quality of your relationship. So I totally believe that. And then secondly, I just want to underline and highlight what you said about conversations. I think it's amazing that you recognize that you see it as so critical. You don't know this about me, but
I'm learning.
Yeah, my whole dissertation was around how people work together. And I boiled down to, I think it was over 300 pages of what I wrote and like years and years of researching it into 4 words. Talk is the work. I mean, that it all boiled down to, can we have a conversation? And part of having a conversation is also listening. Mm-hmm. Where do you see the state of people listening to each other these days?
I don't want to generalize. It does depend upon the person, but a lot of what I've seen is this distraction culture. I mean, we have so many distractions, electronics aside, just in general. If you have a child, they're bound to interrupt at some point. If you have a pet, if you have a clock that goes off every 15 minutes, you know, there are so many distractions that it can be really hard to engage one-on-one. You also have the social anxiety rise that's occurred, especially in people my age. And I think that's come from this greater awareness of the world that we're taking on, right? Like we have to conquer climate change. We have to conquer political climate. We have to conquer, you know, the global sanitation crisis and world hunger. And there are so many problems that we're taking on that it's causing us to be crippled in our own social life. And I think that these outer distractions don't allow for us to connect deeper in person, because there are other things that you have to read. There are social cues, there are physical cues, there's tone of voice, and everyone receives those things differently. It's like we're all antennas and we're trying to pick up the same frequency, but we're all on different ones. So you have to try and tune yourself into the frequency that the person you're with is on. And it's not easy, but I think we're learning. We're getting better. We're not good, but we're getting better at it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I just want to point out that this is, I think, why you and I are friends. One of the reasons, tiny little reason.
The second is the food.
So much is the food. Why do you call me out like that?
No, I'm calling us both out. I don't think there's been a single conversation that we have that hasn't involved food.
I love that.
I don't think there's been one.
Because you're Mexican like me. She's not really.
I'm the whitest person. Okay, have I told you the story about going bowling?
No.
This is totally off point, but we went bowling to just like a generic main event one time, and you know how they have those cool black lights when they come on and it's just like, oh, I feel great, I'm bowling and everything's glowing. My skin glowed. I was so white because I hadn't gone outside, it was the winter, that my skin glowed.
Oh my goodness.
Just to give you guys an idea of how white I am.
But you're right, like we do gather around food. I think it's a human thing, and it's definitely deep in the Mexican culture to gather around food. But what I was going to say was when I'm with you, and I think when you're with anyone, I have never actually seen you pull out your phone and look at it or be distracted by a digital device. How did you, like, do you do that intentionally? You do?
Yes. It's something that I hated that other people did. And it's not to say that you can't have a conversation and check texts or be okay with someone who's on their phone. But I found that I felt like my time didn't matter as much to the other person if they spent 50%, 60% on their phone, because that device was more important than the actual conversation we were having. And it didn't matter if we made eye contact. It was just the being together. You know, one of my love languages, if you're into that, is quality time and gift giving. I hate receiving gifts, but I love giving them. And so I think that's part of quality time, is just knowing that you can be with someone without having to have those distractions. You know, I love when I can watch a movie with someone and neither of us checks our phone. We're in tune with each other and we're in tune with the movie we're watching. And that like tells me where we're at in our friendship and relationship.
Yeah.
I almost feel guilty now because I've intentionally kept my phone off the table for pretty much any interaction. I get to the point where I feel guilty for taking it out because I feel like I'm disrespecting the other person and their time, because time is the one thing you can't get back. You hear it all the time, but unless you actually think about it, it's true. Do I want to spend a minute on my phone responding to a text, or do I want to spend a minute getting a coffee for someone or talking to someone in line? You know, I'd rather be doing the latter than the former.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the most, I don't even have the language for it right now, but valuable, meaningful, important thing that we can do when we're with another human is literally immerse ourselves in that moment, because that is the way that we give each other life, right? Everything else is, I don't know. It's just not it. Like when you're in the full presence of someone else, it is the whole chocolate and cake and icing all at once. I was going to use it like a baking metaphor and it just didn't come out right there.
It's okay.
So one of the things that you just said earlier that really sparked my curiosity is an interesting thing that I didn't grow up with, but you did, is this idea, like when I grew up, we didn't have electronics. We were outside until the sun started to set and then we'd come in because we were starving. So we didn't know what was happening in the town next door, much less the next country. And now you brought up the point of being connected to the bigger picture. I mean, for instance, you know, this pandemic, it is worldwide. We are, for the first time in this century, for sure, experiencing something collectively across the globe. So how has that influenced you, you think? Like, if you could imagine a world where you didn't know what was happening outside of you versus feeling connected to all of these things that are pulling at you.
So my childhood was actually very similar. We had a computer room. So I didn't have electronics until I was actually in high school, which is very different from most people my age. I didn't have a cell phone until I was 16. A lot of people had them way earlier. When the street light came on outside and you were outside, that's when you knew to come home for dinner. And, you know, dusk was falling and everyone just left and kids were left to their own devices. And I wouldn't change that for the world. But what made me have a conscious collectivist mind, I guess, is the community I grew up in. So everyone on my street was diverse. There was a native family who had moved there from Alaska who was actually Inuit and talked about their culture. And, you know, it was a multi-generational home. So I learned a lot from them. My neighbors were from Mexico to the other side of us. The neighbor across the street was an older man who was single. It was such a diverse neighborhood that I couldn't not be aware of what was going on because people would talk about where they were from. And it's not to say that they weren't all American or anything like that, but they would just talk fondly of their culture and of their food and of their past and of their family and their life. And it made me intrigued. And so I would look it up. I spent a lot of time at the library. I would read on those things. And that is mainly where I got my connected mindset. I think that's how I avoided being super patriotic. I say that with a laughing tone, but I think Americans have it drilled into them that America is first and America is the best, and we don't really need to learn about any other country. I mean, most people can recite all 50 states, their cities, most of their major cities and their capitals, but they can't recite, you know, countries in South America. They don't know that Africa is actually broken up into different countries, you know, and so that awareness of different culture and different people, and it really taught me how to think outside myself and to continue that and to push on and to be more aware of how my presence where I'm at could affect someone else later on down the line somewhere completely different. And then my mom also grew up in a very, very small town where people don't leave. They live and die in the same 50-mile radius. And I constantly question what would have happened if she didn't face her fear and come to Texas, which was a little bit more big and centralized and had access to the outside world. Because if she had stayed in that small town in Missouri, I would not be the same person at all. I would be closed-minded. I would be very introverted and not able to see anything beyond what was in front of me. So I'm very thankful for her to that, because her stepping out of her comfort zone with my dad and a newborn child allowed me to actually embrace the fullness of what was out there.
Amen. And I think you and I both believe that this ability, this choice to move out of what is comfortable into a growth area without getting overwhelmed is really kind of part of the juicy part of being human. And you do that throughout your life. You know, this constant growth and pulling at your edges. What would you recommend to someone who wants to do that, but just feels like, you know, I'd rather be in safety, and safety feels better to me? I think you and I both would agree that in our mind, safety might feel better, but in reality, this push towards new and growing and learning and seeing new perspectives is actually deeper and richer. So what would you say to someone who feels scared about making a decision where they don't know the outcome? They don't know if it's the right thing to do. They don't know if it'll get them what they want. And it's all those don't knows, inability to control the outcome, that keeps them from taking action.
I mean, we all wake up in the morning. We don't know what's going to happen that day. We may know what we're going to choose for breakfast. We may know that we're going to shower, and we may know that we have to go to work. But what happens on that commute, if our food is still fresh, if we are feeling up for the day, that we don't know those things. And so I think for me, whenever someone says, you know, I'm comfortable or I just don't see the value in stepping outside, even if it's just trying a new food. This is a silly example, but my mom thinks fish sauce is the most disgusting thing out there. And so every day I sneak fish sauce into her food, like just little bits, and she doesn't know it. And she won't listen to this podcast, so it's fine. But slowly she is trying new things. And so I think sometimes we have to take that tactic of like getting a child to try vegetables. Oh, just see me eating the broccoli. Like, isn't it cool? It looks like a tree. It's got a lot of texture. It looks like leaves. why don't you try a bite? You could be a dinosaur and eat the broccoli too. And almost in the beginning, you have to trick yourself into making that change, into taking change that is actually quantifiable. Because if you go from, say you want to write a book, if you go from 0 to writing 1,000 words per day, you're going to get burned out. You can't sustain that. So you have to find little sustainable changes in order to work your way up to the big change.
That is actually also supported by the literature. So taking small steps also helps rewire our brain to trust that the next smaller step is going to lead to what we want. Because you're right, it's about tricking ourselves, because the brain is a backwards looking machine. It says, have you done this before in the past? You know, do we have an experience of it already? And if you say no, it's like, no way, dude, not doing it then. Right.
Well, and it's also hard too, because your future self is a foreigner. They might as well just be a stranger. You know your past self because you've lived through that time, and you know your present self because you're currently in it. But your future self is an unknown. It's why we procrastinate. It's like, oh, I'll just let my future self deal with it. They're strangers, essentially. So it's easier to put off that change.
You know, there's another aspect of ourself that I don't think we call in very often that I think is important to recognize, and that is our ancestors. And you already do that because you mentioned that. As you're doing your discernment, you're running through, you know, your grandparents, your parents, where did this come from? So I just want to bring that up too, just to, again, emphasize, underline, highlight that part of our conversation.
And also it's okay to change it. So my ancestors were racist. They were huge bigots. And like, I mean, if my grandmother brought home a black man, it would have been the end of the conversation for anyone involved. And that's not something I'm proud of, but it's something I have to acknowledge because that's where I come from. And so being able to see the brokenness in them that came from their culture, because at the time it was what was accepted, unfortunately, because it benefited them. Being able to go back and say, this is not okay, and I'm going to break that generational idea, because my grandparents on my dad's side are still alive and they still believe a lot of those things. Like if I brought home a Hispanic boy or a black boy or anyone who wasn't white, essentially, they wouldn't talk to me. They would probably cut me off. But knowing that and still choosing to break those generational ties and taking the good from it while rejecting the bad, that's huge. And that's okay too. You can accept parts of your ancestry without having to accept all of it.
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So for people moving through change, what else would you, or do you have any other insights or learned experiences that you would share with them as they're moving into their own transformation, recognizing their inner voice and what really calls to them?
I think I would find an anchor. It's better if it's not a person, because it's a lot to put on a person to be your tie to who you are, but find something that gets you outside of yourself or that reminds you of your why. So for me, I have Post-its on my mirror that I clearly state what I want to accomplish. And some of them are small. It's like take a shower every other day, but you need that reminder, or brush your teeth, or mine says learn Chinese because I need to learn Chinese, or to write a book, or to get my mindset in a certain pattern. And seeing that every day helps because it reinforces it, and it makes those leaps, even though they are large, seem a lot more manageable because I'm ingraining them in my brain. So my anchors are my Post-its. And then for comfort, you know, I do things like go on walks, or I have my dog, or, you know, family and friends. But it's definitely important to have an anchor that reminds you of your why without intimidating you away from it.
Yeah, one of the things I want to emphasize that you've said, both this in the response to this question and the previous one, is really the idea of taking small, unscary, manageable steps towards what you want so that you keep going.
I think a big sign of it too, if you go from 0 to 100, is that you need to evaluate why you're doing it, because a lot of times we sabotage ourselves. And so sometimes we have the best of intention, but our brain says no and it wants us to fail. And so it will constantly go from 0 to 100. And that's when you need to evaluate, you know, is this really what you want to do? And if so, how can you break that down? Because it could be part of your self-sabotage cycle just to try something, automatically fail, and then give up, and then say that I can't do something. It's been a barrier for me in the past.
Well, this has been fascinating, like all conversations we have. I want to thank you for coming to hang out with me, having this conversation, sharing some of your beauty and some of your wisdom with my audience. If you'd like to reach out to Ren, kind of see what she's up to, she is at Fahrenheit Company, and I'm going to add her hashtag or her Instagram tag and website to the show notes. So if you're looking for the show notes, regardless of where you're listening to us, you'll be able to find them on my website, viviancarrasco.com. Is there anything else you want to share before we close? Or do you want to invite people to something specific?
There's not really anything specific going on. October is a huge month. It was National Coming Out Day. This is being filmed and recorded in October. So just to give some context, it was National Coming Out Day and also National Mental Health Awareness Day. So just take some time to check in with your queer friends and with yourself to make sure that you're doing okay, because no one's going to be more gentle to yourself or more harsh with yourself than your own being. And so it's important to keep that in check.
I appreciate that. Well, and you have the cards, and I have a set of those cards, so they're amazing. That's an easy way to reach out. What's another way to just reach out to your friends, and really bring up that conversation?
I think it depends upon their age range. There's a lot of studies that show that if you ask kids questions constantly, they get annoyed by it and shut down. And some people into adulthood are like that. But I think asking questions is huge because it shows the other person that you're interested in them. For example, I was meeting a friend the other day for coffee, and she was talking about having kids and trying for kids. And we were talking about my card line as well. And she's like, I really think homosexuality is a choice. I really think that everything within this community is a choice. And I said, that's totally fine. That's why I created these card lines, to have a conversation. But have you ever thought about what you would do if your child came out? And she goes, no, I've never thought of that. And so she's trying for a child who could potentially be queer, and she had never thought about what she would do if that child came out. And so I think just asking those questions that can cause people to then ask more questions of themselves and of those internal beliefs that they've just taken on unknowingly can cause a lot more change than we realize.
I agree with you. That is so beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Within You podcast. And may you be well.
And be gentle with yourself.
Amen.